Parents of identical twins. How did you first learn to tell them apart at infancy? My cousin painted one girl's toenails pink and the other purple until they got old enough for their personalities come through. My parents could tell us apart because I have a birthmark on my eye and my sister had one on her head. But they started dressing us in pink and purple because my grandma was watching us and thought she had fed both of us, but the other was still crying and she realized that she had fed one of us twice. I worked in a nursery years ago and there were a set of twins. If you called one name, they would look at each other before answering as if they were deciding who was going to be who that day. Honestly, as an older identical twin, whenever someone says my twin's name I turn because I'm just so used to it. Even Marisa, when I meet someone who thinks I'm her, I just play along and then tell her so and so said hi when I talk to her later in the day. My sister and I are identical except she has a very small birthmark on her butt. Our parents would check our booties to make sure they had the right one. I'll bet that got awkward in high school. My dad is a twin. If I don't know my uncle is around, I still can't tell them apart. My twin sister has a birthmark on her head that I don't have. They'd also put me on the left side in every photo because my middle name is Elizabeth, so they thought for Elizabeth Eliza left to tell us apart in the pictures. Ironically, it turned out I was right-handed and my sister was left-handed, so she should have been on the left instead of me. My sister and I are identical, but when we were born I was a full pound and a half smaller. It wasn't too difficult to tell that one baby was fatter than the other. Apparently my sister was a selfish fetus. We're still friends though. I wonder how much of later life health outcomes can be explained by your in utero situation. I'm not a parent, but I am an older sister. They even called me mom when they were toddlers. When they were first born they looked incredibly different, so we just assumed they were fraternal. One came out head first and the doctor used forceps, so her head was all purple and weirdly shaped. The other came out feet first, so her head looked normal. After a while they started looking a lot alike, but we knew them by then so we had time to get used to it. There were still mix-ups, though. They typically wore different colors, but sometimes I would switch their outfits and my mom often wouldn't even notice. Luckily one has a birthmark on her ankle so we could always check who it was if we weren't totally sure. She got so used to it that she would show strangers her ankle when they asked her name. They also sucked opposite thumbs, but both turned out right-handed, which helps a lot now when looking at old pictures. They're teens now, and while 95% of the time I immediately know who is who, there are still a few times now and then when it takes a moment to recognize who it is, especially if they're wearing clothes or a hairstyle that is more like how their twin usually dresses. I don't tell them, though, as they still get offended if people mix them up. One interesting thing I've found is that it's a lot harder to tell them apart when they're sleeping. It's like their personalities are gone and so you have to rely just on their physical features, not whatever it is that makes them unique. They've always given us grief for those moments when we do confuse them, but lately they've been making baby photo albums for themselves and they can't tell themselves apart at all in old pictures, so they have to ask for my help. I'm better at it than they are, but it's still hard and there are some photos where we really do not know who is in the picture. LPT. If you have identical twins, label who is who in pictures so you don't have to make blind guesses later. While we aren't identical, short of removing our diapers, male-female twins, our parents could not tell us apart for the first year of our life. While it was easy for them to dress us in different clothing to tell the difference, I still like to embarrass my dad with this story. My grandparents bought my parents a set of engraved silver picture frames when we were born. They have your name, weight etc. engraved on them. When I was 13 I finally confronted my dad to ask him why he didn't have any pictures of me in his home office, only if my brother. He defiantly pointed out that he had my baby picture in my silver frame. I proceeded to remove said picture and show him the back where my brother's name was written. It was the same picture as the one in my brother's frame, only blown up slightly. Even after 13 years, my dad could not tell his babies apart. It was nice to get to embarrass my dad for once. Similar story, only mine was laziness rather than a mistake. As babies toddlers, my youngest brother and I were almost identical. He was the fourth child and my parents had their hands full. So rather than take new baby pictures, my dad just took my photos where I wasn't wearing dresses pink for his office and passed them off as my little brother. twin here. My parents would use socks around the house. One of us would only have the left sock on. The other would only have the right sock on. One sock. Two sock. Wintertime. Hypothermia. I have identical twins daughters that are teens now. I could just always tell which was which. From the day they were born they looked and sounded different to me. When they were about 9 months old we went out and left them with a babysitter. When we got home I looked in on them and they were both sleeping in their own cots facing away from me, but I knew from the back of their heads that they were in each other's cots because the babysitter mixed them up. It took their dad about 6 months to work out who was who. The grandparents a couple of years. A lot of people still mix them up even though they have quite different haircuts now. They don't have any distinctive features, but to me the overall look of them is different in the same way you know who is who when you see two different unrelated people together. We just dipped the first one in chocolate and rolled him in nuts. This kills Candy as a child. I am an identical twin. My mom said she could always tell us apart because I was the baby that always cried and screamed the most. Thanks mom. When my twin sister and I were born, my dad seriously asked the doctor something really horrible cause a friend had told him it. My dad asked the doctor if he could tattoo a single dot on one of our feet. Doctor was horrified. However, my mom did come to a time where she couldn't tell us apart. My dad came home from work to find her bawling. They ended up taking our footprints and compared them to the ones they had from our birth to figure out who was who. My parents dressed me in patterned clothes and my sister in plain. Other than that, we were, and still are, completely identical. It still freaks me out that I could actually have initially been intended to have her name, and her mine. Some people can tell one vintage of wine from another. If you're really invested, it isn't that difficult. On the other hand, some wine snobs just fake it. The question that interests me is how many times has a set of identical twins switched names throughout their infancy because their parents were just faking it? This has certainly happened. In the grand scheme of things it wouldn't matter, I guess. My sister had identical twins around the same time that my elderly grandmother got really sick, and her mind went. My grandmother would get these really strange ideas in her head. One day, she told us that when my older sister gave birth to the twins, she snuck out her room and down to the infant ward, cut a lock of hair from one of them and said, "I christen the baby's name," and from then on, she told them apart by which one had a lock of hair missing. My sister says this never happened and she never told our grandmother anything that could have been misconstrued as that. For the interested, my grandmother got better and her mind recovered tremendously, though not all the way. She lived a few more years and passed away pretty recently, peacefully. Sorry for your loss. My grams went earlier this year, as well. Got my girls home after 2 weeks in special care thinking I knew better. I was their mum of course, so knew who they were without name tags. Took them off and within 10 minutes I didn't know who was who. Had to take a guess and didn't know if I was right until their next way day as one was always a half lb heavier. Oops, always wonder if I really did get them right 7 years later. After that it was different colored hats. After a few weeks one had started growing what would be a large hemangioma birthmark on her eyelid. Obviously we knew who was who from then on. I asked my brothers if they could distinguish themselves in photos. Both had said they knew what the other twin looked because that's who they've seen all their life. I worked for the phone company years ago. I had a supervisor who had a twin brother, also a supervisor. They, two men in their 50s, would switch with each other for fun. They thought no one knew. But when your boss goes from calling people by their first names one day to everybody being guy or buddy the next, it was kind of obvious. I am a sister of identical twins. I was the only one growing up who could tell my baby brothers apart. So whenever my parents had to make sure they had the right kid they would just be like, "Hey, which kid is this?" and I would tell them. Every morning I would tell them what kid was which and they had color coded clothes. One only wore red while the other wore blue. This went on until they turned about 2. The people I've known to have identical twins have either done nail polish on the toenails or gotten knit bracelets for them. Just to them. I wonder how many twins ended up having the wrong name applied to them permanently after a mix-up when they both looked like identical potatoes as newborns. Bear in mind they'd have to have been mixed up an odd number of times. If they got switched twice, or 4 times, or 6 times, etc. Then they're back where they started from. I know someone who put a dot in between the toes of one of his twin sons. It had to be where his wife couldn't see it, because she could tell them apart after like 2 days, and it took him 3 months and he didn't want her to know he couldn't. Would have been funny if the mom had the same idea, but dotted the opposite kid. My younger sisters are twins, and honestly my parents got them confused all the time. It also didn't help that they both had speech impediments and would frequently respond to people who were calling for the other twin. I was one of the only people that could tell them apart and understand what they were saying, so I usually had to tell my parents out with that. It would usually go, "Mommy, that's twin A, not twin B. Also, she's been telling you about the butterfly she caught today and you gave her peanut butter instead, so." One wore the boy clothes, the other wore the girl clothes until they were old enough to tell apart. I will neither confirm nor deny I may have mixed them up a couple times after a bath. We left the hospital anklets on at first for a few days, and had plans to use nail polish on one of their toes, but one of my sons has a vein on the bridge of his nose that is just really a dot. Super useful, really, though they have a ton of differences that make them unique from one another. My friend's mom said he put a Sharpie mark on the bottom of one of them when they were babies. This is the same suggestion I've heard, and probably what I'd use. Draw angry eyebrows on one of them. The evil one. One weighed a pound more than the other. This weight difference became a few pounds over time. I knew one parent who could only tell her sons apart by the direction of their hair whirl. One whirled left, the other whirled right. Twin here. Got dressed in blue for Bridget and my sister was in pink because her name starts with a P. Now I wear pink all the time and she wears blue. Sure made it handy for when we look at old photos though. I'm an identical twin. My mom was going to get our ears pierced with our own birthstone. Yeah, that didn't work. Plus, our ears were too small. I'm not sure what they ended up doing. She did mention she had to take us in several times to get footprinted to figure out which was which. I sometimes wonder if I am actually my sister. I eventually had heart surgery, so then it was much easier to tell us apart at that point. I honestly didn't at first. I know that might make me a horrible father, but they're identical. I was already beyond exhausted. It was like 2:45 in the morning and all I could do was try and keep my wife calm throughout the entire delivery. Even with them being in the NICU for a while, I still didn't tell them apart. Something happened though that changed that. This was a few weeks after their birth and me and the wife drop in to see them in the NICU nursery. We sign in, wash up and walk in to see them. The nurse that's on shift makes small talk with us for a few moments. I go to walk over and check on them. My wife notices it first. There was something on the neck of the older twin. I was shocked and somewhat pee at first. I thought it might have been a wound from something a nurse did accidentally, though reasoning took over pretty quickly. If something had happened, we would have received a call. After further discussions with the on-call doc, we were informed that it was a hemangioma on her neck. I made sure to do my research after that. For those who might not know what a hemangioma is, essentially it's a group of bright red blood vessels that shows up on the skin. A birthmark of sorts. That was 4 years ago when all this went down. It's a lot easier to tell them apart now, though when we ask her if she wants to have it taken off, she says no. I like my strawberry, she's adorable, and most importantly, they are both healthy and full of personality. Furthermore, even when her hair is covering up the mark, I still get them mixed up. My wife enjoys laughing at me when that happens, but hey, they look so much alike. If it weren't for their differing personalities and that birthmark, I'd never tell them apart. I was the first one out and my forehead was flatter at first. My mom used to keep a pin on a boob and a pin on a baby to keep track out of who drank out of which boob last. One thing I'm grateful that my mom did was never label either of us the shy one or the stronger one. Personalities change and labeling just seals the deal. Let you kids be kids and don't label them. My sisters are identical twins. When they were babies, my parents wrote their first initial on the bottom of their foot. Sibling of 2 sets of identical twins here. Don't ask if it runs in the family. Identical twins aren't genetic. It was only a fluke of nature. Since one set is older and the other younger than I, it's been cool distinguishing them apart. The younger set has very defined personalities, so if I see one of them doing something, I can automatically figure out who it is. The older set is a bit closer in personality, so I have to tell by defining features like the way they wear their hair, clothes, etc. Some people think that it's too many kids, but twin siblings are awesome. I have an identical twin and my sister's foot was in my ear in the womb, so I have a pointed ear, so they used that. I am an identical twin and I still can't tell who I am in baby childhood pictures. I've heard stories that back in the day they would sometimes leave one twin boy uncircumcised. Dunno if there's any truth to it, but I always wanted to carefully inspect my classmates Bruce and Brian. Right, wink and finger guns. Identical twin here. My parents marked my left big toe with a black marker. I was known as Black Toe, name redacted, till I was like 3 or 4. I have identical 2-year-olds. Honestly, they look completely different from each other. One was vaginal and one was C-section, so head shape is different. Also their ears are different. One has a birthmark on his hip. The other has a white discoloration on his neck. I get them on my arms and my mill said it's something medical. Some id twins are mirror twins. Also, just for your information, every baby is different. Even id twins, so their personality will show who is different. My baby A was laid back and baby B was colicky. My nieces are twins and my brother-in-law is a hilarious butthole. He wrote their names on their heads in Sharpie. Hospital band stayed on until I was sure which was which. A was smaller than B, but that only worked when they were together. A has a birthmark on her neck and B has a mark on her tummy, so once we remembered that, it got easier. I still mix them up once in a while. I have cousins who are identical. I mean, completely identical. It doesn't help that their parents dress them the same and they have similar personalities. They even have similar names. Jenny and Ginny. The only way anyone can tell them apart is a small bracelet their mom made them. She makes a new one every year since they were born and she's kept all of them. Jenny gets purple and Ginny gets pink. We started out writing the first letter of their name in Sharpie on their feet. Once they got more active and the Sharpie started to wear away, we resorted to painting toenails. One child has blue toenails and one has green toenails. At no point have they been unmarked. No swapped babies in this house. I always wanted to know how the parents decided on who gets named what. You've chosen the names Robert and Joshua. Does the first one out get named Robert? Do you wait to see them both and pick based on who looks more like one name versus the other? A diamond Pepe, it only appears once in ever 20 million memes. This is the rarest Pepe, like in 5 seconds for good luck. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.